Hey, Boozhoo! Welcome back to Boozhoo, Nana Boozhoo, the podcast about Ojibwe language and culture. I am Nana Boozhoo, and tonight we're doing a live stream, and so later on we're gonna bring out Natasha, and Michael's gonna come out with his guitar, and we might even have a visit from a very special guest named Makwa. Makwa. And so, yeah, welcome to the show. Let's see. Took me a while to set up, and I'm still a little disgruntled. So this is the Boozhoo, Not a Boozhoo podcast. I don't know why I'm sorry. My name is Nana Boozhoo, and if you're new to the channel, we teach Ojibwe language and culture. And what else do we do? I understand why everything looks weird. This is on the I got this thing on mirror. This is backwards. What did I do? Should I fix that? Who cares? So yeah, this is probably our fourth or fifth live stream. We were doing some live streams on Facebook, and they were really pretty well received. So I thought, hey, let's tune in here to YouTube and see what's going on. Let's see, some of the things we talked about before. I think the title of this is Chief Bemidji. I was talking about the history of Bemidji. Where we filmed this, it's it's in northern Minnesota. And the town Bemidji is named after the lake, Bemidji. It means crossing water lake. If you're familiar with the Mississippi, that starts up here. And so the story goes, there was a man named Shena Wishkung. He was a man who rattles. I think it had something to do with the rattle, like a turtle, I don't know, like a medicine rattle. And so, as the story goes, there were some white settlers who came up here, and they met this Indian guy, and they're like, "Hey, what's your name?" And it was Shena Wishkung. And he thought they said, "What is this place called?" And so Shena Wishkung goes, "Oh, this is Bemidji Gamug." And they went, "Oh, your name is Bemidji? Are you Chief Bemidji?" Like, no, that's the lake is Bemidji. And the settler's like, he's probably Chief Bemidji. Let's just call him Chief Bemidji. He's an Indian. And so, he became like the town mascot, I guess. I don't know. And lived out his life. As the story goes, the first lumber mill that was built in Bemidji, the first customer was Chief Bemidji himself. He went in there, he bought some lumber so he could put on a floor on his birch bark wigwam. And he lived in the south shore of Bemidji. And then the settlers built up the town. And we'll get into that story. But so then he becomes an old man, right? And he goes to the settlers and he says, "Hey, you know what? I need to file for an allotment or something. I got to do some paperwork so I can live here. I'm going to buy this land." And the people are like, "No, we got a better idea. We're going to build a sawmill right here where your house is. So you can't, not only can you not buy this land, why don't you, head back to the res?" And Chief Bemidji was like, "Oh no, look, how about I renounce my tribal membership?" This is what it says on the statue, you guys. Statue in Bemidji. It says Shena Wishtung. And they framed it kind of like, these white people are bad. But then they said, even though he offered to relinquish his tribal membership, the white people were like, "No, get out of here." But then, as the story goes, He finally died, and they buried him in the Greenwood Cemetery, or whatever that place is called, across from the college. And sure enough, you go there, and there's a great big tombstone. And the tombstone says, Chief Bemidji. And there's like a nickel, like that old Indian head nickel symbol on it. And then there's like a George Washington monument kind of, what do they call, obelisk? And there's a pyramid on top. And it's a pretty big, grave site, grave tombstone. But the sign then on the statue says, so when Chief Bemidji died, all the important people of the town and the governor or whatever, everyone was in mourning. They made a big deal about it. There was a whole big funeral, and they buried him there. And the flags, they flew at half-mast. So revered was this elder Anishinaabe. Or maybe he's buried in Mission. I mean, it says this, I'm not making this up, it's on the plaque. There's some discrepancy. He might be buried in Cass Lake. Well, what is it? Do you know what the history or not? Well, we heard that he was buried there and there's a tombstone, but who knows? I don't think he's buried in Bemidji. I don't think that a tombstone, number one, they wouldn't have called him Chief Bemidji. At some point, the guy would have said, hey, you know what? That's not my name. I told you the first time, it's the lake. My name is Shetao Wishkong. Call me the man who rattles if you can't pronounce it. But why you call me Chief of the Lake, whatever. And if they respected him so much, why didn't they learn his name? They couldn't be bothered to learn his name. And then if they respected him so much, why didn't they let him live on Lake Bemidji? I mean, I don't know. What is that? Thanks. Well, I keep waiting for someone to show up. Who am I telling this to? I don't know if anybody's watching. Oh, there's 3 people watching. Good enough. Who cares? Welcome to the show, everyone. If you're not from Bemidji, you might know us from Paul Bunyan and Babe. Anytime you see a movie where there's like kind of a family that can't afford to go on vacation, so they go to cheap places, like that movie Vacation, they always show a glimpse, like if they're going on a cross-country vacation and they go to small towns, they'll always show Paul Bunyan and Babe. And that's to tell the audience that this family is going to a bad place for vacation. There's a whole story there. Hey, Michael, you want to tell them the story? Yeah, I could probably do that. How's your hand feel? It's a little sore. All right. Well, I'm going to take a break, and why don't you come up here and talk, and maybe you could play a song. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Michael to come up here and tell a story. Maybe you want to talk about Paul Bunyan? Yeah, sure, I can do that. All right. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the producer of the show and the illustrator of the books that aren't advertised today. But Michael Lyons is a cartoonist and a musician and lately a puppeteer, I guess. Please welcome Michael Lyons. All right, come on up here, brother. Oh, wow. I don't feel so good. Oh, geez. Hope I don't. Oh, no. Nana Boozhoo, what happened? Hello, everyone. My name is Michael, and I'm the creator of Boozhoo, Nana Boozhoo. I'd like to welcome you to the live stream. And I always thought it would be pretty terrible if one day your kid's watching Sesame Street and what Nana Boozhoo just did, if like Ernie and Bert did that, just died on. Anyway, if you're new to the show, like Nana Boozhoo was saying, we teach Ojibwe language and culture, and we usually have an Ojibwe word of the day. I'm going to start by saying Boozhoo, hello. Anin, Aji Ayan, how are you? And our word today is cramped hand. We filmed this show from Bemidji, Minnesota. Bemidji is located in north central Minnesota, and we're sort of the big town between three reservations. And we're not a big town; we're like 11,000 or something. But we've got Cass Lake or Leech Lake to the east, Red Lake to kind of the northwest, and then White Earth sort of to the southwest. And for the last 2 years, I've been producing a short puppet show that teaches Ojibwe language and culture. And just recently, I've gotten some offers to appear live, and I thought it might be a good idea to do some live streams, in part to say thank you to everyone for watching, and then also to give you an idea of if you wanted to book me for your school or something. I could bring Nana Boozhoo and Natasha out on my guitar, and I like to talk about, history, the boarding schools, growing up in a small town. I'm a cartoonist. I've illustrated a number of children's books, mostly in Ojibwe language. One of the books I've done is Dog in My Ingan. And for some reason, this thing, maybe I should see if I can fix that. I don't know. I'm seeing a mirror image of myself, so it's probably what you're seeing too. Anyway, it's called Dog in My Inga, and it teaches kids animal names and how to count to 10 in Ojibwe. And on our podcast, it's also served as kind of a cool platform to play music. We've written some songs, and it's been really fun to have Natasha, who I'll bring out in a minute, to do harmonies and stuff with a female voice. And again, I'm still kind of experimenting with the microphone. I apologize if the guitar sounds tinny or if you just can't hear it. Sooner or later, I'm going to invest in one of those processors so it sounds better. But to get started, welcome to Boozhoo, Nana Boozhoo, the podcast about Ojibwe language and culture. I'm happy to be here with you today to speak Ojibwe and learn about the language and culture. So yeah, I used to be in a band called Ishi, and people would ask me, "Oh, what does that mean?" Because it's spelled in the Ojibwe way, I-S-H-I, Ishi. No, it wasn't spelled I-S-H-I. I don't even remember how it's spelled anymore. Anyway, it's to tell this whole story about how in Ojibwe, part of the culture is that you don't ever want to brag. And so it's difficult sometimes if you're a Native American person and you want to be a performer or tell jokes or something. Everyone loves, they call it Indian humor. And so there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of joke telling and just kind of teasing and stuff in Indian country. It's totally cool to be funny. But when somebody gets up on stage or draws a lot of attention to themselves, lots of times they're kind of looked at sideways like, don't show off, you should be modest. Ojibways are very modest people. And so sometimes you feel kind of conflicted about performing or getting out there or, and, remaining humble. So the idea of Ishi was that, like, say in the Ojibwe. Okay, here's the word of the day. Dway igun. Dway igun. Drum. Dway igun. The drum, they say, is the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Can't do it with my left hand. And anyway, so, but if somebody came up to like a traditional Indian, they're like, oh, that's a really nice drum. The guy wouldn't say, oh yeah, this is a sweet drum. You should see, I'm so awesome. The, correct response would be like, oh, this old thing, this is my Dway Gunish. It's just my old drum. It's not that big of a deal. It's just Dway Gunishy or something like that. But that was way too long of a story to tell people. So it just abbreviated to, why do you call yourselves Ishi? It's like, because music's kind of gross. But yeah, so we were talking about Bemidji. And the mascot for Bemidji is Paul Bunyan and Babe. Giant blogger and a blue ox. And the story goes that around the turn of the century, when Bemidji first started to establish itself as a town, they wanted to promote winter games or something, tourism in the winter. And they were going to have a winter carnival. So somebody built the Paul Bunyan and Babe statues and then brought them up. There's something to do with steam or smoke coming out of Babe's nose when they traveled. So maybe this was after cars were invented. I don't even know how this works. But the idea, or what they say in Minnesota history, was that it was used to encourage tourism. And I thought, what a stupid idea. It's like, come to Bemidji. Oh, for the beautiful fishing and nature, hunting, should we go up there for that? Or is there a huge statue of a logger and a blue ox? Inexplicably. Why a blue ox? We have no oxen up here. So I don't understand the Paul Bunyan narrative. But then back to Chief Bemidji. So I was walking around, and sure enough, there is a tombstone with the name Chief Bemidji on it. I can't believe the actual person, Shana Wishkung, would have gone by the name Chief Bemidji. It seems, not only is it not his name, it seems kind of racial or racist. Like, because he's an Indian guy, the first one they met in this area, couldn't be bothered to learn his real name, gave him the moniker of Chief. He was nobody's chief. But then when he died, and in history, he's remembered as Chief Bemidji. They're not even sure where he's buried. I know they wouldn't bury a man unless he had no family and no connection to anybody, which is hard to believe. Why would they have a tombstone without his name, his birth date, his death date? Instead, they gave him the nickname that the locals, who clearly, obviously didn't speak his language. I don't know. But history is such a mystery. What tribe are you from? I'm from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. I was talking to somebody recently, like, he was like, yeah, everyone kind of doesn't know. People say, what tribe are you from? I'm from the Red Lake tribe. It's like, we're all from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. These are bands, Red Lake, Leech Lake. But I grew up in LaPorte, and my father's a Leech Laker. So I identify as a Leech Lake Anishinaabe. And my grandfather was a Leech Laker, but my grandmother was actually Dakota, Metawakitan. And they were both boarding school kids from Flandreau. Should I do that song? Maybe I'll do that. Part of my high school presentation I'm thinking about putting together is to talk about the boarding schools and what they meant to Native people back then and the legacy they left. So most Native people know, oh, from White Earth, Boozhoo, Kendra. Kindra? Kindra? I'm going to guess Kindra. Red Cliff of Minnesota and Wisconsin. Well, Boozhoo, welcome. So nice to see you here. Do you have grandparents who came from, who went to boarding school? Most natives up here and everywhere, if you go back, especially people from my generation, their grandparents, a lot of them went to boarding school. And the boarding schools were government set up military type schools, religious schools that were set up to assimilate Native American children into the dominant culture. So when a Native student showed up for boarding school, they immediately had to relinquish everything that identified them as a Native American, even if they didn't speak English. So they get a haircut, they took all their clothes away, they took away their jewelry, they forbid any ceremonies or anything that would remind the kids that they were Native Americans. And then they gave them military uniforms or school uniforms. And Ojibwe or any non-English language was forbidden. So my grandfather was 10 years older than my grandmother. They didn't meet at boarding school, but they went to the same school. And when he was in his early teenage years, junior high kid, he tried to run away from boarding school on 3 different occasions. He had a brother there and a sister, Ray and Tootie. And they didn't dare take Tootie with them, but the plan was to always sneak out of the school, get down to the train tracks. And there was always a boxcar trains that would head north and go along Bena, which is near Bemidji. Nearby northern Minnesota standards, it's like 40 minutes away. And by Minnesota standards, we judge things by how long it takes to get there, not miles. It takes about 35 minutes to drive there from here. So my grandfather ran away 3 times by sneaking out, jumping on a train, and heading north. Each time the cops would catch him and bring him back. He also talked about how there were adults that would ride the trains at the time, and he called them hobos. And there were men who, I think it was during the Depression or something, who would help the kids. They'd feed them, keep them warm with blankets and stuff. But the cops would catch him, bring him back to school. And the second time, the director, the principal of the school, got all the kids together in the gym and made an example of my grandfather. They said, if any of you other kids get the same idea as this boy, this is what's going to happen to you. And so they whipped my grandfather with a leather strap. When my grandpa finally got away from boarding school, he used to tell me the story. And he was like, I was sitting there in class and I saw that whippoorwill out on the windowsill. And I thought, you know what? That old bird's got the right idea. So I closed my book and I got up. I started walking out there. The teacher stopped me and she says, where do you think you're going? I said, I'm going home. And he just walked out of school in the middle of the day and nobody stopped him. It's one of those things where if you just do it in broad daylight, everyone thinks someone else is going to do something about it. So he just walked out and there, just let him go. He made it down the train tracks and he jumped on a train and made it all the way back to Bena. Jumped off a moving train, walked into the yard where his dad was raking. His dad goes, where did you come from? And my grandpa goes, and my grandpa's 14 at the time. He goes, where do you think? He never went back to school. So I wrote this song about my grandpa leaving Flanders. I was born in 1913 in the storm of 1913. Then at boarding school, I was nobody's fool. Down at Flandreau, I grew madder every day. That's why I had to run away. 'Cause this is no way to live. And I wanna go home. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. And on a fateful day, me and my brother Ray, we planned our getaway. If we can make it to them tracks, we won't be coming back. We're gonna hop a train. I thought we got away, but then the cops came and took us back to a leather strap. But I wanna go home. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. I wanna go. And I remember it still. I saw a whippoorwill out on the windowsill. How could I sit still? So I got right up and I walked right out. The teacher said to me, "Where do you think you're going?" Boy, I said, "I'm going home. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. Ni wiki way. Ni wiki way. Ni wiki way. Ni wiki way." Oh, miigwech, bizendawieg. Thank you for listening. And let's make that the Ojibwe phrase of the day. Miigwech, bizendawieg. Thank you for listening. So, yeah, that was the song I wrote about my grandpa. And for years, I told that story. I've worked in some high schools, and I used to work for a tribal college, and I've been to some conferences and stuff. And for years, I told just that side of the story about how cruel the boarding schools were to my grandfather, how he escaped. When I was younger, I used to blame a lot of my problems on what they would call historical trauma or intergenerational trauma. And I learned about, if you have this addiction or this mental illness, these things get passed down. And it was all pretty neat and tidy, except for my grandmother's stories of boarding schools totally disrupted that narrative. So there's my grandmother. So my grandpa was Aubrey Lyons. My grandmother was Leona Lyons. Leona was 10 years younger than Aubrey. And when she went, She had already known a lot of kids who had gone to boarding school, and all of her cousins went. She lived in Boy River, Minnesota, which is a really remote, small community, and there was no school. And so she actually asked, she went to her mother or grandma or whoever. She goes, "Can I go to boarding school? I want to go to school with my cousins." And they're like, "Well, if you want, go ahead. Bus is coming tomorrow." And so she went. And my grandmother was very bright and a very hard worker. And boarding school, it doesn't make a good movie to talk about the good things that boarding school did for Native Americans. But there were very strict schools with high standards. Like a lot of private schools, it's true, they didn't respect other cultures. And it was old world punishment, stuff like that. But if you played the game well, and my grandmother was also very athletic. And so she excelled at boarding school, graduated at the top of her class, went on to college, became a teacher herself, and lived out her life as a teacher with a strong Christian faith. And accredited a lot of that, was grateful for the boarding school. She didn't like it when I would badmouth her alma mater. And I still remember her saying, she was always proud of me. I was her favorite. And so she would be very, she wouldn't dance. She was an evangelical, but she would just kind of tap her knee. Or if she was really into the song, she might do this. It's like making fry bread or something. But she would just always say afterwards, "I don't care what you say. I loved Flandreau." It's like, "I know, Grandma." Don't tell my friends. So now I kind of feel like I got to tell the other side. Boarding school was, what it was. But like everything, it wasn't just bad. A lot of, the World War II and boarding schools defined that generation. So pre-American Indian movement, the parents of the American Indian movement, where people went to boarding school and served in the military. And like the hippie movement and the civil rights movement, I think the American Indian movement sort of rewrote history in a way. Like they were trying to go, "Hey, all these movies is a bunch of crap and Columbus didn't discover us. And so we're going to, fix things." But they didn't, sometimes I think they didn't really respect their elders enough. And they didn't think the traditions of their own families were real traditions for obvious reasons. Boozhoo Niji, Boozhoo Jono H. Good to see you, brother. I think he's a brother. Monroe Jeffrey. There's not only one side to a story. Isn't that true? I'm learning that about so many things. It's everything. Just like my hair as I get older, instead of being black, it turns gray. There's a shade of gray. So yeah, history in school. So I'm still trying to get to the bottom of Bemidji and history of Minnesota. This is the other thing I didn't quite understand. So I do a lot of walking around in Bemidji, through cemeteries. And I went to the Historical Society. And I love this stuff in a way because it was really close to my grandparents. I was saying in an earlier podcast that the most native thing about me, and like Indian people, and especially mixed bloods like me, where I was talking about identity and thinking about, I killed a buffalo, now I'm a real Indian. And so, learning the language and telling the stories and going to sweats and stuff. And sometimes we do that because it makes you feel more Indian. But the most Indian thing about me was, and will always be, my relationship to my grandparents. because Indian grandmothers, especially, and grandparents, they have a very special connection to their grandchildren. And I like to say that Indian grandmas love their grandchildren fiercely. Uh, Indians aren't afraid of their grandmother. It's not like you hear from some groups where, grandma's going to give you a whooping. It was never that. Indian parents don't beat their kids. But they establish such respect or whatever that the idea of disappointing your grandmother can be, you'd rather be beaten. And so the other day when I was dogging teachers, I had to say, no, some of my favorite people have been teachers. But I was writing behind this has to do with history. The history that I was taught, and granted, I barely paid attention. I went to a public school. And let's face it, you blame the kid for not understanding history, but they'll talk about history like, oh, here's the Vietnam War. We have 4 paragraphs written about that, and talk about it one day. And you'll live your life going, oh, this is what I think I understand about Vietnam. If it wasn't for the sitcom MASH, I don't think anybody would have any discussion about the Korean War anymore. But I was riding behind a car and it said, if you can read this, thank a teacher. And I thought, what? Why? Teachers don't teach you to read. You teach yourself how to read. If anything, your mother maybe turns you on to reading. But teachers are part of the problem because they're the ones who teach the history. And so if we're all, as Native people, go, oh man, they told us Columbus discovered America, and they don't know anything about Native American and Minnesota history. They are our teachers, the educated people who take so much credit, who whine incessantly about their pay, about the quality of their work, about the difficult, everything. And in the end, they do a terrible job. Everyone wants to give national holidays to teachers. And we blame everybody except the teacher for why everyone comfortably says, oh, I'm terrible at math. Oh, really? How come? Well, I studied it for an hour a day for 12 years with educated, trained professionals. If I studied piano for an hour a day for 12 years, I would be playing Mozart right now. Anybody would. But if you study math for 12 years, you usually end up with kind of a resentment, a hatred of math, with maybe an ability to do long division and multiply in your head. We all got to laugh at our teachers who told us, when you grow up, you're not going to be able to carry around a calculator with you. So you better learn how to do this in your head. And we all grew up and got cell phones and went, hey, what do you know? We all have calculators. But, teachers want all this credit. They have a teachers union. They're even suing the Department of Education. They're suing the Department of Education not because everything about their career is ridiculous. I don't think I'll be applying for any teaching jobs this year. But the whole premise is I'm going to go to college, I'm going to borrow this money, I'll become a teacher. The one job everybody knows what it's like. It's the only job that you go into with any experience because we all went to high school, we all went to elementary school. So every day you got to watch somebody do that job. So people who become teachers know what they're getting into. If you grow up to be a draftsman or an electrician or a plumber or a construction guy or anything, you see a movie maybe once of someone doing the job and you think, oh, that's probably what it's like. I'm going to work in advertising. I saw a movie and the guy got to be creative. But you really don't know until you do it. For teaching, we all know what teachers do because we watched it every day growing up. We all know how crabby they are, how lazy they are, and that they kind of do the same thing every day, year in, year out. There's a routine, and once you're in, you're in. So after all of this, after the 4-year degree, all of the experts, all of the blah, 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 the proof is in how poorly educated the masses are. If you see a homeschool kid, the cliche of a homeschool kid is that they're really smart, that they do way better in standardized tests. They go to good colleges. You know, if you're educated by a woman who doesn't have a job outside of the home and maybe didn't go to college, your odds of doing well in college are way better than if you're educated by people with a high school license. People don't want to hear it, but I'm saying it. And Jonathan from Facebook, Boozhoo, Niji. It's good to see you. And so I've just been dogging teachers, and I think it's because we're in the come back to school. All right, so because of my education, I have one set of history in my brain that's all screwed up, but it's also what they actually teach us is all screwed up. So I'm going to play a little song and then talk about education. Best movie from the 80s is The Wall by Pink Floyd. When we grew up and went to school, there were certain teachers who would hurt the children any way they could. By pouring their derision upon anything we did, exposing every weakness, however carefully hidden by the kids. But in the town it was well known when they went home at night, their fat and psychopathic wives would thrash them within inches of their lives. And we don't need no education. So yeah, education. So I wasn't a great student until I went to college. But in high school and elementary, I was kind of a C student. And so when I talk about history, I'm just telling you kind of what I gleaned. Again, the product of a public school education. So in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue with George Washington. And then when they got here, England tried to tax the tea. So the Indians, so the white people dressed up as Indians to, what is that called? Frame the natives and create an act of terror by, I don't know what they did, threw a bunch of tea in the lake, in the ocean or something. And that was called the Boston Tea Party. And then after that, there was a war to kill Hitler. And then we went to Vietnam to listen to some music. And then Trump was elected. So that's that's pretty much the highlights of American history. And I was thinking about Bemidji and the history of how we know it. Oh, this is what it was. I was thinking about Prince, actually. So, any Prince fans out there? Anybody cry when Prince died of a fentanyl overdose? I was just talking to a friend of mine tonight. Even Prince, if you're going to abuse your ankles like that, dancing in high heels all throughout the 80s. I saw the guy jump off of a speaker once that was taller than him. I mean, it was like a 2-foot speaker, but still. And he, in high heels, just dropped and didn't twist an ankle. But before he died, and I think right around the time he probably became a drug addict. He was actually using a cane. And he made it look cool, but he was only in his, I think, late 40s. He had to use a cane to walk around. But Prince was on public television once. And I forget the guy's name. I want to say his name is Guy Smiley. But I don't think that's right. I think Guy Smiley was a Muppet on Sesame Street. You love Prince. Yeah, me too. But there's a PBS talk show that Prince was on during an election. I don't even remember which election. I think one of the Obamas. And they asked Prince who he's going to vote for. And he goes, I got no dog in that race. As soon as I found out that George Washington wasn't the first president, I realized we were all being played. And he was a conspiracy theorist. And I didn't look into it until about a week ago. And sure enough, there was the spirit of 76. There was the time when the founding fathers or whatever all said, I think somebody got a drum and somebody got a flute and they got a flag and they ripped it up or something. And they had a big parade and they were like, yeah, we're going to be a country. And then history says George Washington was elected in 1783. And you go, wait a minute, 76 to 83, there's 7 years there. Who was in charge for 7 years after the party? And then you look up and go, oh, there was a new president, like one every year until George Washington. And one of them was actually John Hancock. And so you realized, oh, that's why the guy had such a big ego. So, okay, it's all sign this. Well, hey, I was a president. John Hancock. I'm surprised he didn't sign it President Hancock. So, but then for some reason, we're taught that George Washington was the first president. And you realize they're trying to kind of get away with, I kind of had to wonder, was this by design or just by being sloppy? So when I was a little kid, as a Native American, right away, older Indian guy said, hey, don't believe what they tell you about history. And all Indian people are just very casual going, oh yeah, first thing we learn in school is Columbus. And then the second thing is, oh, by the way, that's a lie. They used to write in every history book that Columbus discovered America. But, don't believe that. It was pretty quickly they told us, here's what they say, it's not true. It's like learning about Santa Claus and that he's not real on the same day. But then they say, but everything else from now on we tell you is going to be 100% true. So this is my understanding. Once upon a time, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492. He was going to prove the earth was round, sailing west. When he hit what we now call America, and I learned later it wasn't even like the United States part of America, it was like down in the Caribbean. But when I was taught in history, this is just what history taught me. He sailed over here and he thought he was in India. So he gets on the shore and he meets the Indians and he goes, hey, you guys are Indians, right? We did it. Hey, we got here. I met some Indians. We're in India. And the Indians are like, no, we're Native Americans. What's an American? But then Columbus was still just like, get out of here. You guys are Indians, right? Because we went all the way around the globe and we're in India now. Are you guys Buddhists? And finally, the native people were like, all right, fine. Yeah, we're Indians. You work it out. You keep us and the people from India straight. But then it'd be one thing if the native people, the indigenous people were just like, look, we don't care what you believe. But not only did they let Columbus and the historians just go along, just like with Chief Bemidji, where they misnamed him and then just continued to call him the misname for the rest of their lives. But then we called ourselves that. Part of me thinks that Chief Bemidji might have just started calling himself Bemidji, you know? Because why did the rest of the continent just cave to, okay, we're all Indians? From the Navajo to the Ojibwe, the Sioux, the Potawatomi, everybody will all just agree to be called Indians for 400 years or so. And then around 1970s, we're going to get real sensitive. Quit calling us Indians. We're Native Americans. Oh, like South America? Well, no. That's like Canadians? No, they're calling themselves First Nations. We're the Native Americans. Oh, are you all the same? No, we have 400 different languages. I'm actually Anishinaabe. And you probably know us as Ojibwe. You used to call us Chippewa. Why did it in history everyone just kind of get casual with names? So Columbus gets over here, renames everybody Indians. All that terrible stuff happens. I don't need to tell you, The slaves started the slave trade, made the locals. This is what I was taught, in college. I didn't learn this in high school. Cut off people's hands if they didn't gather enough gold. And then there's Squanto. And, I've been talking really well about the movie Squanto because I thought Adam Beach was really cool in it. And I'll leave it at that. So then they say, okay, there's a whole Squanto thing. Apparently Squanto introduces the Europeans to popcorn, calls down a hawk on his arm, kind of puts a spell on a bear by singing to him. And so there's Squanto and then there's Tonto, Johnny Depp. But, so George Washington. So then they teach us, okay, Columbus came, sailed the ocean blue. It gets real fuzzy there. At some point, it was actually like 100 years later, there was the Thanksgiving story. When I was a kid, I kind of thought it was the Columbus guys and Indian people having Thanksgiving together. I thought Columbus kind of showed up in the spring, and then by the winter, got to know the locals, and they were starving. So Indians came and said, hey, why don't you have some pumpkin pie? And then we got along great. But then there was the story of George Washington. Adam Beach is a Ojibwe, and that makes him awesome too. Is he really a Ojibwe? Yeah, that's right. Isn't he from Canada? I think he's one of the First Nation Ojibs. Yeah, we have so few cool action figures. Somebody once did a comic book about Native American heroes. And I don't know who wrote it, but the heroes that they were suggesting were real life heroes to Native Americans were like tribal leaders. Wilma Mankiller. It's like, you're not going to inspire a child with Wilma Mankiller. But I'm tired of all that stuff too. Native American leaders. Oh, here's Winona LaDuke. She's a Native American leader. It's like, where's she leading people? To the next protest? Can't have a leader of a whole race. But what was I saying? Oh, so George Washington. Here's the story of George Washington. When I was a kid, they taught us this. Once upon a time, back in the days of the grandfathers, there was a boy named George Washington, and he never lied. And one day he went out and he chopped down his father's prized cherry tree. And the father comes to him and he says, George Washington, did you cut down my cherry tree? And George, knowing that he would be in very big trouble if he admitted this, and knowing that he could also get himself out of trouble, all he had to do was lie, decided not to lie. Instead, he said, Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down that cherry tree. And the moral of that story, children, is that you can believe anything that we tell you about George Washington because he never lied. It was a big claim. They told me that the only other person in history who never lied was Jesus Christ. So Jesus, George, never lied. Then you got to wonder what was up with George's dad that he would somehow freak out. Number one, it's his own fault. He's a bad dad because he left his tools out where a little kid could get a sharp axe. And then, like, what was the story? You know, he comes into George's bedroom and goes, George, you chopped down my cherry tree? And he goes, you know, George, when I was your age, I planted that cherry tree. I had a dream that one day I would grow up having cared for this cherry tree year in, year out, watering it, fertilizing it, watching it grow. I would see it grow with me, and it would see me to marry, and then one day I'd have a child of my own, and together we would feast upon the fruit of this tree, me and my son. But you've chopped down that tree. I should beat you. And George is like, no, it wasn't me, Dad. It was one of the slaves. But he didn't do that. He could have got himself out. You could have blamed one of the many slaves, the many human beings he and his father owned as property. No, he was too moral to do that. He wouldn't blame the slaves he owned and beat if they didn't do what he said. He risked his father's wrath and took the blame. So then, you know, he grows up, works real hard, becomes the 8th president of America, and they decide to celebrate him like he's the king of America. And they've built this cryptic, monolithic Washington Monument. You can climb into it, but that's what it looks like on top of the Chief Bemidji tombstone. And then there's that statue of George Washington holding his finger up, and he's wearing a toga. And he's all muscular, like he probably wasn't that muscular. And, you know, he looks like a Greek king or something from the old days, or Roman emperor or something. George Washington. Why would they do that? Did he dress like that sometimes? Did the founding fathers have toga parties? Probably. I don't know why. And so here's the final thing, Mike. So there's George Washington. And then everything goes with that, all the creepy stuff on the dollar bill. You know, why did they make him on the $1 bill? That would make sense if he was the first president, and like the 5th president should have been on the 5 instead of Lincoln. Why was Lincoln? You know, why were we taught certain presidents? You know, it seems like we were taught about Washington because he never lied, Lincoln because he died and freed the slaves. That was the narrative there too. Lincoln freed the slaves. There's one guy. And then Kennedy, because he was killed too. Tecumseh, yeah, thank you. It wasn't even his real name. Why do they always rename people in history? Well, we called him Squanto. It's not even close to Tecumseh. Thank you for that. You know, is it to throw us off the path, or are they just making that stuff up? Look like a conspiracy theorist if you question the official narrative. And but I just don't understand. I don't get it. I don't understand anything they taught me in school. I don't understand anything they taught me in school. I got a bad feeling they made it up as a basic rule. Yeah, I just get it. Oh, so Prince. Here's a Prince tune. And Prince was great because he was totally cross-cultural. You know, white people liked him, black people liked him, natives liked him, gays liked him, straights. Straights were the last ones. Poor white working class. You probably call them white trash, but I don't, because they were my brothers in Laporte. But the white trash in Laporte would not like Prince or Michael Jackson when I was growing up because they wore makeup. But then when Purple Rain came out, and especially the intro to When Doves Cry, all the metalheads came out and they were like, holy man, that guy can play guitar. And then, everyone just kind of gave up and went, yeah, we love that song. We love that whole album. To be fair, I didn't really pay much attention after the album. The one that had Sign of the Times. Sign of the Times. Dig, if you will, a picture of you and I engaged in a kiss. The sweat of your body covers me. Can, my darling, can you picture this? You will, a courtyard, an ocean of violets and blue. Animals strike curious poses or feel the heat between me and you. Leave me standing alone in a world that's so cold. Maybe I'm just too demanding. Maybe I'm just like my father, too bold. Maybe you're just like my mother. She's never satisfied. Why do we scream at each other? This is what it sounds like when doves cry. History is whatever the storyteller says it is. Yeah, because all history are just stories. I remember thinking they used to tell us, native traditions. The problem with that is it's oral tradition. They didn't write it down, so their stories don't really count as much. Their history is, suspect. But white people history, they wrote it down so we can trust it. And then even what they wrote down, you go, wait a second, that's your story? There was a library called Alexander or something that burned up. And so most of the history was destroyed because it was all contained in one library. That is why we have the Dark Ages. What? There was one, one museum. Nobody knows anything about history. Most of us can go back to our grandparents' parents. And even white people are like, oh yeah, well, we used to be called something else. When we came to America, then we changed our last name so people wouldn't know we were Norwegian or something. That was sketchy. Indian people, we have that, we kind of attribute not knowing our grandparents' language because of the boarding schools. The Norwegians, they all have the same story. Like, well, my grandparents spoke Norwegian, but they wanted to be able to talk to each other without us knowing what they were saying. So they never taught us. Like, is that really? They wanted to kind of have their own secret codes. They didn't have to, tell the kids to get out of here, we're talking. That doesn't sound right. Why did they? I've heard that it said that, well, no, the white people, the immigrants, when they came here, they wanted to be Americans. They didn't want to hang on to old cultures. Everyone was just going to be an American. So they stopped thinking themselves as Norwegians and Germans, and they thought themselves as Americans. Well, that's a nice idea, I guess, sort of. Kind of shitting on your ancestors, but is that what America is built of? People who didn't want to teach their children anything about their parents. As I get older, I just feel dumber and dumb. No, I don't feel dumber because I'm starting to see like, oh, I don't know. I do realize how much I don't know, but I also realize how much the people who think they know don't know. Like teachers. There aren't any teachers, in Bemidji who can answer that question about Chief Bemidji. Bonita Wishtong. Shetao Wishkong. Shetao Wishkong. The man who rattles is what it translates. Man who rattles. And there's probably some history to it or some truth to it because there's weird details like the man who rattles and, that lake is really called Bemidji. How did they allow them to change the name of Cass Lake and Leech Lake? Why did we cave so quickly? Probably because we had 2 generations of boarding school people and our adults. What happened there? That's the role of the men, to not allow us to get bullied. And where were the warriors when they were changing our names and telling and scrubbing our history? Because also the timelines don't line up. I grew up watching Little House on the Prairie. And so I got this sense of, all right, what was that, like 1860s? Something like that. They had photographs around that time, the person behind, but there were Indians were still living in wigwams and riding horse and stuff. And so were white people. They were wagon trains. So, Charles Ingalls brings his family to Minnesota. They build kind of a lean-to mud hut. It's a little house on the prairie. And the stories you get, the idea you get from the late 19th century is that life in Minnesota is really difficult. Whether you're a farmer or a logger or a fisherman, you had to work all year round to just prepare for the winter, to get through the winter. And, we had all kinds of skills, from logging and carpentry to hunting and fishing, ricing, all that stuff. And we did it. We should be very proud of that. But we went from that to in 1902, I think, or something. They founded the town of Bemidji. And they built the courthouse. The Episcopal Church was built around that time. They built a number of just beautiful, the BSU, Bemidji State University campus. All these amazing stone buildings. They say that the limestone that they built the courthouse out of, a courthouse with a dome roof and a Roman statue holding Lady Liberty scales, a lot of ornamentation and, money and the effort. How did you get the bricks from Indiana to Bemidji, Minnesota? You go to the Minnesota Historical Society and it's, loggers, which is also kind of cool. My grandfather was a logger. I'm like, whatever. What about the Masons? How did they build the courthouse and all these churches? Where did they get some of these old buildings have curved, like tower areas where you need curved glass. They went from wagons and pooping on the street, or horses pooping on the street, and outhouses. I don't even know how they lived. My own father had an outhouse when he was a kid. But for this brief period of time where no one really remembers very well, there's like 1-page written history of Minnesota or Bemidji. They built all this amazing architecture and then decided, well, That's enough. We built this courthouse and that building right in front of it. Built all these churches, St. Philip's Church. And from now on, we're going to build crappy little nondescript wood, plywood homes and businesses that won't last more than 20 years. And we'll never go back. It will never be economically efficient. Somehow it was economically efficient before there were businesses here. But now you couldn't build buildings like that. So who built all the college buildings and the courthouse and the churches? I don't believe it was a ragtag bunch of European settlers who found this place coming up the Mississippi with their Indian guide and meeting Chief Bemidji and misunderstanding, but still calling him Chief Bemidji because who cares? Can't respect an Indian man. Indians. I am an Anishinaabe named Man Who Rattles. We're going to call you an Indian named Bemidji. That would be very disrespectful. We're white settlers. I don't know, man. So I don't know. If I do high school visits, I mean, part of me wants to go and like work up a kind of a comedy routine or just dog history, talk about Native American history and culture, but then also kind of dog the teachers, knock them off their pedestal. All of this stuff, you know, I think we've been kind of trained to blame the government, you know, but the teachers were the ones who directly told us the lies. You know, your beloved elementary school teacher who cared about you, her job was to indoctrinate the children to spread false stories, propaganda for some reason. Oh, but we don't do that anymore. Now we teach true history. And you don't have to worry about that in things like math and science, because that is objective truth. Oh, really? Do you teach about evolution? Yes, it is scientific fact. Why do they call it a theory? Oh, because you can't have an experiment. But all the scientists have agreed. Once upon a time, there was nothing. And for no reason, blew up and created everything in a second. But for no reason. Because math is truth that, you know, we've never been very good at teaching other people. So only a small minority of people can actually use formulas in the way they were intended to be used. It's very esoteric knowledge. But all the math people agreed, well, it goes on forever. Therefore, mathematically, anything that can happen will happen. So naturally, if all possibilities are available, random selection, random will eventually a couple of whatever was created by exploding nothing came together for some reason, somehow, let's call it gravity, and made planets and started spinning or something. Just use your imagination. We're mathematicians. And then there's a whole history of math people that have been celebrated. I am Copernicus. I am, who is that? Pythagoras. I am Pythagoras. I am Pythagoras. I came up with the Pythagorean theory. Well, have you invented toilet paper? I'm sorry, what? Oh, we don't know about paper and toilet paper or toilets. But I have figured out really important stuff about the universe, and you can trust us because we have a telescope that, you know, if you do this, look at that. 30 times the human eye. Now look up at that star. Science. Yeah, this is science. You know, they teach us that evolution is a fact, and they know it's like, well, no, it's not a fact. It's a theory. Theory is something. It's a story. It's just this is a guess. And they massage it by saying stuff like, "It's our best guess." It's like just a guess. There's no best guess. There's zero evidence for what we're saying. But if we guessed that the universe was limitless, and we guessed that things happen mathematically, if it's possible to happen, it's something it did happen, we know it can happen. So based on that, anything can happen, and therefore everything has happened. So planets have been created and not created, and there's other planets just like Earth. There has to be, because mathematically everything has to happen. But under all that math, this is true. Not only are there other planets that have suns and their mathematical, rationalization or realization of, well, we don't die because we're this far away, and we work this stuff out as scientists. We won't teach you, but trust us. Not only are there other planets with people on them, there's another planet out there where there's someone who looks just like me who's doing a podcast right now. And his name is Michael. And he has puppets. No, he doesn't. He has friends. Would you like to come out and say hello, Natasha? Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's kind of fun to hear you talk and stuff like that, but you sound kind of negative. I know. I don't know why that is tonight. Do you think I should try to be funnier? Yeah, probably. So I'm Natasha. I work here too. I'm going out with Nana Boozhoo. And yeah, welcome back to the show. I'm gonna go sit over there. Giga Wabamin, Minawa, Ho. Yikes. So that was. That's Natasha. Yeah, I hope I don't come across too negative. I'm trying to be funny. I need to work up more punchlines. So yeah, anything can happen. Everything can happen. It's a theory. Good theory. And I used to believe it because I used to have faith in teachers. I remember being in high school, my science teacher was explaining how the Big Bang theory happened. And I said, "Do you believe in evolution?" Or I said, "Don't you believe in the Bible?" or something like that. And he goes, "Well, I could believe in the Bible if one day were 6 billion years." And at the time, I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's deep." Because it's all metaphor. So for sure, one day is 6, and evolution and gradually came into being. Then finally, after thinking about this for decades, it's like, no, man. There's obviously a creator. Somebody had to make this stuff. And evolution is trying to explain why everything is here without a creator. Because if there's a creator, then everything, it's like, well, then why? Evolution doesn't have to answer the question of why. Why did you make us? There was an old Plato, a philosophical thing where they would say, if you find a watch in the woods, you'd have to assume that somewhere there was a watchmaker, because the watch wouldn't just naturally, pine cones and grass wouldn't have just fallen in a perfect way in a random thing where it would make a perfect watch. But the theory of evolution and the mathematical, reasoning would suggest that no, in fact, given enough time, eventually a full watch would be created randomly by nature. Nope. Nature can't make a watch. But also nature can't make a human being out of nothing. Can't make a human eye. There is no in between. They always say, well, no, it's natural selection or it's gradual evolution. It's like, okay, maybe there was no big bang, but we were definitely all the same one species that evolved into many species. Because that's what you ultimately have to believe, that there was primordial soup and that there was no animals or plants. Lightning struck it or something. One cell became two. Eventually, some things became plants and some things became fish. And then eventually the fish quickly had to learn to become lizards because for some reason the lizards became dogs or whatever, and then monkeys and then us. But there's no, you can't adapt. The only way that would work is if gradual adaptation would somehow make a person reproduce more often. So if a person suddenly had a baby that, developed, what's the equivalent? It wasn't like one day a fish had a baby that had legs and then all the fish kind of went, woo, hello there. I bet you this guy could carry me around outside, Any kind of adaptation that would be different from what your species would make it impossible to reproduce, I think. I wonder how the Mayans would regard that view. Didn't they change the names of the people at Ellis Island? Yeah, that's a good point. They changed the name of people at Ellis Island. Sometimes people were named after the town they came from. Again, is the story. It's like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from LaPorte, Minnesota. Okay, this guy's name is Michael LaPorte? No, it's the town. Okay, fine. I guess I'll name my children LaPorte. What was up with our ancestors? I mean, I get it's a tragedy that Native American people lost the naming ceremonies. I mean, we didn't have son of John like Europeans, but we definitely had a lineage and we had clan systems and stuff. But your name would kind of tell everybody who your parents were and who your grandparents and where you came from. They come to America and they screw that all up. But the people just go along with it. Yep, just change my name. I don't care. Just shrug their shoulders like, why not? But, maybe that's part of the conditioning. I was talking to my dad the other day, and I wanted to talk about the conspiracy of energy. They never improve upon electricity and gasoline stuff. If evolution's real, it's in technology. The acoustic guitar has evolved into an electric guitar. And even this model with the hole still works. But, there's an evolution where now most people have a way to plug in an acoustic. We've evolved our technology so I can tune without having to listen. Computers, every couple of years, you can just see they look different, they perform better, they adapt to what we need. Computers came before cell phones. A cell phone is an adaptation of the computer. So that evolves for sure. But so I was talking to my dad and I go, the one thing that's never changed in my life, and since they invented it, were those two holes where you plug in stuff in the wall. So when my grandfather first got electricity in his little house in Bina, the tar paper roof and the rose bushes in the front and a mowed front lawn, having dignity and taking pride in your home has nothing to do with how much you make or how big your house is. So he had a cute little home. They got electricity after was my dad. I don't know when they got they didn't have plumbing for a long time. But they would have had a little plastic thing where you plug in electric, it looks the same, it works exactly the same, 50 years, 70 years, whatever it's been. Well, they don't improve upon that. There's a lot of evidence out there that Nikola Tesla had worked out how to get free electricity out of the air, wireless electricity. And so for his trouble, he died penniless and very suspiciously, and none of his work has survived. Alexander Graham Bell or all these crooks were told to appreciate, take credit for stuff he did, and then they hide free energy. I'm sure somebody figured out how to make a car that doesn't run on gas, maybe runs on water or something. But they're not going to give that to us, even though it would lead to world peace. If we had free energy, what's the point of war if you're not fighting in the Middle East? Nobody had any interest in the Middle East until we needed their oil. But who knows? Now we have tons of oil. Go to North Dakota. Why didn't they do that in the 70s during the crisis? Let the child decide what he or she wants to study and learn about. You know what? If you did just let the child decide, they would eventually arrive at a good education. We don't think of that. We think, no, we have to tell them to read about George Washington. A kid will get excited about something, and then just learn everything about it. It might start with, they see a movie about Nazi Germany, and they actually think the Nazis look cool. So they start learning everything about Nazis, and, the school system would not even allow that. The kid get in trouble if he was interested in Hitler. That's the only historical figure that you would be in trouble for. You can read about Genghis Khan or anybody, but if a kid is interested in Hitler, which is pretty interesting, as dictators come, But again, our schools is kind of teaching. He was the bad guy. Makes me suspicious. But I'm not saying I'm denying the Holocaust. I certainly wouldn't say that, because I don't want to be taken down on YouTube. All right. Well, hey, it's already been an hour and a half. Jeez, I hardly even brought out the puppets. All right, I'm going to say goodnight with a song. I want to thank people for coming in and watching. I'm going to work out more jokes. No, I'm not. Tell me if you'd like me to come back for a live stream. Otherwise, I'm gonna continue to. If you've seen the channel before, you've probably seen the videos. I'm gonna try to. I'm sort of in between jobs right now, and so I don't want to buy too much equipment. But I'm gonna buy a camera when I get some more money. When I get some money, I'm gonna buy a nice camera and go outside and do some videos out in the woods. I think that'd be kind of fun. Let me know if you have any special requests for words or stuff you'd like us to do on the podcast, the pre-taped podcast. And ultimately, thank you so much for tuning in to Boozhoo Nana Boozhoo. Let's see, what song should I do? No. All right, here's a song my grandmother liked. Maybe I hide and love you quite as often as I could have. Maybe I hide and treat you quite as good as I should have. If I made you feel second best, girl, I'm sorry I was blind. You were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. You are always on my mind, my lovely viewers of Boozhoo Nana Boozhoo. And I just want to say, miigwech bezendawiyek. Thank you for listening. And I will see you again. Giga wabamin, minoa. Owa.